Well, welcome back, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Never Broke Nation podcast. So I am one of your hosts, Janai Thornton, and I also have with me today
the wonderful Chris Hollis.
The beautiful Alicia Tillman.
Of course, she would say beautiful. And I'm so excited about our guest today. We have been waiting for you, Miss Diana Lynch.
Well, I thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So Diana Lynch, the founding partner of the Lynch Law Group. Can't remember how long I've known you, but we have lots of mutual entertainment industry friends and colleagues. And I was telling my husband off camera before we started, I said, I always introduce Diana, she didn't realize this, as the person, if I were getting a divorce, this is the woman I would hire. So as a married person to say that,
I'm so flattered. Thank you. Poor David. Poor David.
And I've said that about Diana. I've said that about you because I've had the privilege to be on a couple of panels with you and quite frankly, just blown away. Just not to make light of divorce, because, not that I just love and I love companionship, but I have so much respect for relationships and marriage, the institution of marriage, and I take it very, very seriously. And I know people don't get married to get divorced. Certainly. And so I do take it very seriously. However, there's no one here who doesn't know multiple people who are divorced.
Child of divorce.
Divorce person.
Yeah, diverse.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
So it's very real. So this podcast is not encouraging divorce, but it's a reality of where we are. But I just saw you on some of these panels and I'm like, this chick is so bad. I'm like, if it's going down, you want to go down right.
Yeah, right. I need to be on the ship. right. I need to be on the ship, sleeping in the belly of the ship.
You made it.
Yeah, just wake me up if you need me.
So tell us about your journey to particularly focusing on divorce, because I know your background. You've practiced family law and you handle custody issues and child support issues, entertainment law. I think I knew you originally because of entertainment law.
Yes.
And so you have this choice. I know you practice estate law as well. Why divorce?
Well, actually, my practice is driven by the clients that I represent. And obviously, coming from an entertainment background, I was representing a lot of entertainers and athletes and high wage earners. And essentially, they were not being well represented in the divorce arena because many of the practitioners did not understand entertainment. They didn't understand the contracts. They didn't understand how the money flowed. They didn't understand how the assets were being distributed. And so because I had a unique perspective of this, I could leverage that as far as either with my entertainment clients and trying to make individuals and the court understand to my client's benefit that these assets are advances. They're not income. It's in kind, but it's not belonging to the individual. How do you capture that court? And I think that garnered me a unique perspective to be able to assist those types of clients. So from there, I was able to and was hired often to represent entertainers and athletes because I understood how the money flowed and where the contracts meant, how to interpret them. And so from there, developed a niche market representing those individuals. And then obviously those same individuals need asset management and protection. And that's how the estate planning part came.
Nice.
Yeah.
So that makes a lot of sense.
Yes.
So based on all your vast years of knowledge, I've always heard that money is the number one reason why most people get a divorce. Is that true?
Not having a great attorney. No. I think that money is not necessarily the reason for the divorce. I believe in being equally yoked and that sort of thing, and not necessarily from a fiscal perspective. You know, obviously someone can have money and someone may know how to spend it or how to leverage that and make it triple and double or what have you. But you have to have kindred spirits as it relates to how you're going to manage your marriage. And so unfortunately, money, often people differ in how to manage money. I think you know that right?
For sure.
And, that never break neck. I mean, that's the thing. You know, people don't always value money and how to spend it equally. And so when you don't share the same common values, oftentimes it leads to dissension in the marriage. So it's not necessarily the money itself, but it's the values and how those affect the administration of those funds. So
I know when we first sat down, because, you know, I made a joke that I want to learn how not to have to pay to see you. Right. So, like, with that being said, like, with money being such an issue, based on what you were just saying, it sounds like that's a type of conversation you need to have before you get married or something.
I am
like
so
that.
glad you asked that question, because unfortunately, with a lot of the panels that I've been on, and I have been on many together, you're already in the divorce. Right. Okay, you haven't really done the pre-planning. You haven't done the work up front. All right, and this is what this is about. You know, if you have the foresight to consider marriage as any other business, and I'm not saying love and relationship aside, God aside, I'm not diminishing that and its role in the union at all. Okay. Right. However, in any business venture, you have to do your due diligence, right?
Yeah.
And so you're entering into one of the most important business decisions you will make, because you're joining your finances, your life, your rent. It's a merger. Well, I like joint ventures actually. Because they're joined by contract, and with a good attorney, we can dissolve those agreements. I typically represent my clients not to always go into business with individuals. Let's keep your business aside and keep theirs aside, and let's do a joint venture agreement, and we'll set forth the terms of which you're going to perform and I'm going to perform. And if we set that out very easily and plainly, then you know what I expect of you, and vice versa. And if you don't do that, then we know how to dissolve it. And so what I recommend, so you don't have to come see me, and it's not because you won't get divorced. I don't profess that this is a key or cure-all or anything. But if you, and I was saying this earlier, if it's black and white, you really don't need the attorney. So like in business, you want it to be black and white. That's a prenuptial agreement. That's some sort, if you're going to business with your partner, your mate, you want to have agreements in place, business agreements in place, so that you know, if we're going to dissolve this thing, so what's the succession plan? What are we doing? And so in the end, I don't have to, now custody aside, because that's obviously a different animal,
issue.
Right? But as far as the assets of the marriage, me seeking alimony, me trying to, get a portion of your business or what have you, or what about the house, all those things can be managed. And when people talk about prenups and postnups,
don't talk about them yet, because we're gonna get there.
We're gonna get there.
We're gonna get there.
Okay, we're gonna talk about those. I think they're sexy. I think they're sexy. I like those. Yeah, they're sexy. Yes.
We're gonna use that one. Yes. We're gonna use that.
So what I want to know is, what is the average cost of divorce, and what all costs go into a divorce?
Well, it is, most attorneys charge based on time. So you can have a very complex divorce and you have something that can be resolved very quickly. So it's not based on necessarily the idea at any divorce is going to cost you XYZ. For example, if you have no assets, and I find myself fighting harder and longer when there are no assets, okay? A lot of times when we have a lot of assets, we can divide that, take a calculator out, and we can make that work, right? And especially if everybody's had skin in the game, they both invested in these assets, and everybody feels good about apportioning them, is when you haven't had that there's an issue. But it is not, the average divorce could be done as an uncontested, where you're talking less than $2,000, or it can be a hotly contested mess. And I've done those where you're in litigation for a couple of years and you're talking about $75,000, $80,000 very easily. And my attorney's fees award, when I make the argument to the judge, I want that in cash and paid out of your 401k.
So if it's based on time, what's like the average length of a divorce? Like, how long does it usually take?
Like from most simple,
from starting to end?
Okay, well, statutorily, you can actually get a divorce in Georgia 31 days from the filing and service of the petition. So if I'm acknowledging service and I file that, on today, 31 days after that, I can go down to the court, or the other side can go down to the court and get an entry of divorce. Okay. The reason being is you have 30 days to file answers, and if you fail to do that, having consented to all the terms, it's ready for a final. So the court can do that as easy as 31 days. The outside of that could be years.
Years, yeah. Mm-hmm. Anywhere in the middle, right?
Yes. How unrealistic would you want to tie your life up in litigation?
People are willing to dig in and fight, though.
Absolutely.
Yeah, there's a lot of feelings.
And you know, it's
war.
It's amazing because for me, I'm kind of like a bottom line kind of attorney. And I have this argument with my clients. I find myself having this argument. How much is that worth to you? And so it's like anything else, you have to weigh the cost benefit of fighting for this particular thing. And principled arguments cost the most.
Right. So let's go over a little bit of terminology here, so a little 101. So what's the difference between annulment and divorce?
An annulment, a marriage is a contract. Okay, so an annulment is the voiding of that marriage contract.
So it's just like it never happened.
It never happened. And the ability to do that is based on the same conditions that a contract would be voided. Fraud, material misrepresentation of fact, fraud. There are quite a few other things that are unique to marriage, like degrees of separation if you marry your family member, sexual orientation. There's some case law regarding when you think you married to someone from one sexual orientation and is actually another. So obviously the case law has to move into where we are in society. So it's ever evolving, but it's basically I entered into contract with you, and for whatever reason there was not a meeting of the minds. We haven't had the offer, the acceptance, and the consideration, which a lot of people think is intimacy.
And so you define divorce as what?
It's where you have a contract and we're going to actually terminate the contract.
Terminating,
the contract.
You're not assuming that it did not exist.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. And it's material because what happens is I'll say very briefly, I had a case where a gentleman, we could have done an annulment. It was like 6 months, and we could have done an annulment or a divorce. And I explained to him it would be better to do a divorce because you've accumulated no assets during the marriage. We would dissolve this thing and you go on your way. If we call it an annulment and the other side counters for breach of contract to marry, you promised to marry me, you didn't marry me, now I'm going to sue you for that. You could get some damages for her moving to this state and giving up her job. And
Sue for breach of marrying me or not staying.
Breach of contract. And I in fact, one of my colleagues, that was one of the first jury trials I tried.
There's a camera on my face.
Okay, we're going to have to break that down.
It's like any breach of contract. A marriage is a contract. And so obviously, let's say, for example, you and I were going to go into business together.
Yes.
And I have made some startup costs. I've incurred startup costs. I've sold my business. I've incurred some expenses. And now you have backed out of the deal.
And I said, I'm not going to do it anymore.
Yes, you just, for whatever reason, decided not to do it. I would have recourse against you in contract.
Wow,
okay? Now, a lot of times that people don't prevail on that because you have to have a couple of things happening to make that work. But conceivably, it's contract law.
In the world.
Okay, let's not litigate Atlanta. Okay.
Oh my God, mind blown.
I know. I bet you they know that alienation of affection one, but they don't know that breach of contract.
All right, couple more definitions.
Okay.
Is there a difference between spousal support and alimony? Is it the same?
Materially, it's the same.
It's the same. Okay, just we were using them interchangeably. I'm like, is that the same thing?
You're pretty correct.
Okay.
To do that.
So I have a question based on what you just said about spousal support. So I know, headlines. What's that dude named from Grey's Anatomy? Jesse Williams. Like he has to pay his wife like $50,000, I think, a month.
Yes.
Right.
How do they determine how much they have to pay?
Well, alimony is based on 5 factors in Georgia. And I say that because each state is different, and I know you're worldwide, so we want to make sure. All right, so in Georgia, it's based on 5 factors, and so ability to pay, which is a product of what the person makes, earns, has, and their disposable income. A need or standard of living is the second factor. So depending on the spouse and what they're not only accustomed to, but what can they do? I mean, what do they need to maintain their livelihood, their existence as it is? And then the other factors are consequential. In this particular example, length of marriage, children born of the marriage, and fault are other factors. So the two primary elements in the case that you mentioned is his ability to pay and her need. Yeah. And I tell clients all the time, and with representing a lot of entertainment clients, it's very important. You set yourself up for this particular anomaly. Okay, so you have the nanny. You get the beautiful woman or man. Because I believe that this is it's universal, right? There's nothing in this society. There's not the women are being taxed as much as the men.
Yeah.
Okay,
we're gonna talk about that.
So you got to understand what you have signed up for and the things that you're willing to do when you're married. You have to understand the court is going to presume that you're in a position to do it when you divorce.
Isn't that something?
Now that presumption can be overcome with the right advocacy, but
advocacy.
Right back to you.
Little commercial there. Yeah. So what's the craziest amount that you ever heard of someone receiving in alimony?
I had a case recently where, and I'm talking real life, because obviously you hear all the stories and they're paying $50,000, what have you. That's not the reality for most folks, right?
For sure. And not our listeners, for sure.
And so we want to bring it to something that, because you would say, look, that's not me.
Right.
I'm not going to get taxed with that because that's not me, right? But I think a realist in what we make and what on average we earn and what your listeners probably might be exposed to, you probably could be looking at 20% of your net disposable income. So, for example, I've had individuals make six figures, and they're paying $3,000 to $4,000 to $5,000 in alimony. Yeah. Wow. And a lot of that has to do with a lot of other expenses and ability to earn and what they've historically done before. Because the courts and which court you're in, of course, matters too.
So how do you determine who gets what? Like the cars, the assets, the properties, anything like that? How is that determined?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Georgia does equity. The courts are to do equity, okay? Equity doesn't mean equal, but it kind of starts there, okay? So what I tell clients is that the courts, if it's accumulated during the marriage, is subject to division, okay? So what the court will look at is who was driving the car, who was paying for the car, what kind of income was being made, was someone using some of the resources to fund an outside household, is there fault there? And what you're talking about is the investment accounts that you've accumulated, your home and the equity in the home, your vehicles, your debt, all those things are subject to division. And one of the reasons why they may not do equal is if there's fault on one side. And sometimes not only fault, sometimes you can get more. And a lot of times people start with 50 and that's where they end up. But I don't think you should, depending on your client, because if your client doesn't have the ability to earn what the other person can earn, I want 75%. Because that, and you're like, why should they get 75%?
Right.
Because this particular individual is now going to go to an administrative job making $20,000-$30,000, and you're still going to be making $300,000 a year. So, Your Honor, I need my client to get a lion's share of this particular asset or the estate, because but for that, this is going to go like this. So we start here, but we're going to end up there.
And so time in the marriage, is that factored into who gets what or how the assets are divided?
Yes, very much so. And a lot of times you stay and wait, and that may not be the best business decision for you.
Right.
You stay and wait. What do you mean?
You heard it. I want to wait now these are, I'm talking from a strictly financial perspective.
Gotcha.
There are always other factors, but if you've made the decision to leave, a lot of times from a strategic perspective, you want to get in early and talk to somebody about how you set yourself up so that when you go, that other person can sustain themselves. You can limit your alimony, stuff like that.
Gotcha.
I'm learning so much here. So let's just get back to this male-female thing.
Okay.
So obviously women are doing better. There was a time we really didn't work outside of the household. Women are working, making more money.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sometimes as much or more than their mates. So are you seeing men getting more alimony or spousal support?
Yes, I actually represent mostly men. I don't know how that ends up that way, but I do.
That are receiving Alimony?
And getting custody.
What?
And child support. and child support. I don't know why my men never want child support.
Put your
Men
fist down,
get
David.
child support.
I do,
It belongs to the child.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know what it is. Women don't want to pay child support. And the law says the support belongs to the child. And men are just as bad because they sign up for that. They're saying, oh, no, I don't want any support from her. Now, from a strategic perspective, you may want to work through that if you want custody of the children, but you can leverage the custody, the support for the amount of support for the custody, and then come back and modify at an appropriate time.
So obviously the law does not favor by gender. So it's just based on the set of facts, male or female, in these roles.
Well, do you want me to give you the politically correct answer, or you want me to give you the correct answer?
I want the real.
Give me the real stuff.
I'm going to give you the real.
The real.
Okay, the real is that historically, not because they're women, does the court favor women. The reason why they're favoring the women is because of the traditional roles that we assume as husband and wife. So just culturally or what have you, generally speaking, the women at one time were in the home, or even if they weren't in the home, they were coming home and assuming a large portion of the
raising
caregiving.
the children.
And so because the court is not concerned with the adults in the equation, they're more concerned with the children, the least disruptive it could be is what they prefer, what's in the best interest of the children. So by virtue of that, the women tend to benefit from the fact that they have historically been doing the heavy lifting with respect to the children. Now that role has changed. And a lot of times we're very much co-parenting as men and women. And a lot of times the men are assuming a lot of the roles and responsibilities. And with my schedule, I certainly hope my mate would subscribe to that. Let's do this together. We're a partnership in all respects. So however, what that means is in the event of a dissolution, they can use the fact that if they can prove it, that they've been doing this to say, hey, co-parenting is a better option because this is what we've been doing. The kids are great. They're well adjusted and all of that. Or I've been doing the heavy lifting, so I should get custody. And by the way, send me some child support.
I didn't have, but a friend of mine had that issue going through a divorce where her ex-husband's strategy was this whole joint custody thing so he could pay less and not have to pay. Do you see people kind of jockeying for that from a financial perspective versus, what's really, the real intention or what's best for the family?
Absolutely. Okay. I mean, I get that. And I'm not discounting a person's desire to have their children in their care. That's what they're used to. They love their children and they both want equal time because that's how it's always been. I come home, my babies are there, everything's. So I don't discount that at all. But it doesn't take much to kind of figure it out as a litigator. Once you get into the case, a lot of times we can discern whether or not the person's intent is support and or really parenting. And sometimes I've had to shift gears and really have a real conversation about, look, it's going to cost you more the day-to-day caregiving than it is to write the check. So let's make sure that the reason we're here is because we want that day-to-day. And is the day-to-day preferred for the best interest of your children, or is that more about you?
So what happened if you see that you're paying your spouse or your ex-spouse this alimony now, and they got it, but you see now that they're abusing it? Is there anything you can do about that? I mean,
now you said alimony?
Yes, alimony.
They can spend it anyway. Alimony is generally, depending on how it's written, is modifiable. So based on change of circumstances, that kind of thing, you can come back up and down and all over the place. But if you're talking about alimony, it belongs to the person, the payee. So child support is a different thing. And I know I have clients all the time saying they're not spending it on the children. But the way the law perceives is that they have a home, they're paying light, the lights are on, the gas is on. Who cares that they've apportioned they've earmarked your child support to take care of other personal needs because they're using their money to take care of the needs in the household. So the courts are not going to get into where that's being expended. The only time it matters is if the children are being neglected. And if that's the case, you go back and modify.
Right. So if I get this alimony, I can do what I want to do with it.
Absolutely. And call me for lunch.
Okay. David, did you hear that?
So if you're receiving alimony and what kind of things would impact that? Like if you got remarried or you won the lottery.
Right.
I mean, like
your
like,
income
Check.
changes.
Do I get a buzzer? Check. Both of those. Ding, 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 ding. Both of those. Both of those.
Really?
If you get married, it would terminate because you're providing support, and now if someone else assumed that role, then that would terminate alimony. Okay. Now there are times when you get lump sum payments of property over a period of time. Now that's not alimony, and that would not be affected by remarriage. But if it's alimony, it will stop at depending on. And there are some crafty lawyers regarding your estate paying something, but generally speaking, at death and remarriage, it would end. Okay. Now we have some funny folks who just cohabitate.
Yeah,
I
right.
know that was your next question. I got you coming up to
Be booed up forever.
Yes,
we married in spirit.
we can't get married because
That check is
Checkbook.
well, you know, they're like, how much you want this check? Do you really want it? Okay, so essentially speaking, that's been litigated, and obviously depending on the nature of the relationship, if that person's living in your home and contributing to your expenses, it could be construed by the court as if it were a marriage.
Never moves in.
There are ways around anything.
We'll have to talk off camera, off podcast for that.
Y'all didn't hear.
That's your financial planner.
Exactly.
That's my landlord. He just live upstairs.
That is funny.
Are we setting up a company? And
Let's talk about the tax law. So some changes have come out where I think it's effective 2018. Alimony is no longer deductible for the payer, and no longer the person who's receiving it does not have to report that as income. Do you see that being a challenge in your job in negotiating and all of this?
Absolutely. I use that argument as leverage so often. I'm like, and I've even hired individuals such as yourself, because I don't do any of the tax stuff.
Right.
And I said, let's let an expert tell you, let's call Janai, and let's let her tell you what the net effect of this is going to be in your cash flow and your income, because once you get the tax benefit, that's going to, so you're really not paying $2,000. It really amounts to this amount, and it's more palatable if they see it that way. So I've made that argument, and now I can't make it anymore. And I have been rushing to the court in various cases to try to get this final done, because my understanding is that it would still be honored as far as the deductions if it occurred before the 2018.
Right.
Okay. So I'm not saying that's the case, but talk to your tax advisor and or financial professional.
It's just interesting to me under this administration that rule will be changed.
Why did you say that? Because that's what I was like, out of anything. Where did that come? How did that come from the Trump White House? I have no idea. I have no idea. You know,
that deduction.
That's that fat they talk about. Someone slid that in there. He didn't read it.
Right.
He never read that, nor did any of his boys. And so we're looking for reform. It's going to be amended too. Yeah, they're going to call him in the back room. They're going to have a meeting in the men's room.
That's coming real quick.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry, going back to alimony. I'm sorry I didn't ask this when we were talking about it, but how long can that last? Like
lifetime.
Get out.
Yes, it could last.
Write that down.
And that's what I was
your
saying.
ex-wife has a sudden
until
death.
she remarries or death, or until the payor's death. And sometimes, depending on how it's crafted, could be chargeable against the estate. Wow. Yes. But most of the time it will end if either of them were to pass.
Gotcha. Now, based on what you just said about death, I know we were talking about this, but is there something else as a spouse you should ask for besides just alimony? Like, you know, what life insurance, anything like that,
disability insurance. You want to make sure that this person can continue to pay.
Absolutely. What we generally do, yes, especially if you have, we generally will have life insurance associated with any payment of child support through the minority of the children. So that's almost always in there if you have somebody who kind of knows the lay of the land.
Nice.
The other thing we normally will do is if you have alimony payments, a lot of times it's leverage, because obviously when individuals say, well, I get alimony, well, I need to see everything, because obviously you may give up some retirement or investment and you get alimony, and that may be more palatable for the other. So there are so many moving pieces. But if we know sometimes you're going to be getting $250,000 in lump sum alimony payable over a period of time, we definitely want insurance to cover that.
Right.
Because what happens is if that person was to expire, his estate is not liable for that, and then you won't get it. So you want to do that for as long as the alimony's payments are being paid and stuff. So there's some creative drafting things that you want to have in there to protect yourself. You absolutely want to do that.
What if you're paying alimony and you lose your job or you can't afford to pay it anymore? What can you do?
Modification.
So just like a child support modification.
You can modify.
How frequently can you modify?
Well, you can modify child support, and since I mentioned that, you can modify child support if there's been a material change over 25% of your income or the within 2 years. So, for example, you lose your job, you don't have to wait 2 years to modify your child support. You lost your job. Okay,
right.
It was a life-changing situation. If, however, that is not the case and you just have periodic increases in income or decreases, then it's usually every 2 years you go and modify on support. Alimony doesn't have that provision. You can modify as long as there's been a material change.
Right.
And it's up to the court's discretion as to what is material in your situation. If you're paying $200, $100 may be material.
Yeah. Right.
So if you're the person paying alimony, do you have to report that your income increased?
No.
So whatever amount you got, that's it. So if I do win the lottery, or I, my salary goes from 50 to 300, it doesn't matter.
Standard of living. Hopefully you don't have any kids together and you go somewhere. And you're not on the news with your big check.
Yeah, exactly.
Stay
with
off
all
the
your family
television.
behind you saying,
Wear a mask.
yeah.
Exchange over.
Yeah. You find out stuff. You hear stuff and that kind of. It's no different than child support. You don't know what your father's making or the mother's making.
I don't have to say anything
unless it's in the documents. But sometimes they'll say, especially with insurance, proof of insurance within every 2 years or every year, I want you to send it to me. Let me know you got it.
Got it.
Okay, so let's talk about legal separation.
Okay.
Not sure why people get legally separated versus just separated. What does that mean?
Well, Georgia doesn't have what other states call legal separation. We can do separate maintenance orders. For material purposes, it is essentially the same thing, okay? But there's some nuances of it that's different. But essentially, what it does, it says we're going to dissolve all issues except the marriage. We're not sure we want a divorce. We don't have to come back and remarry. But we want to separate. So that means we need to do a parenting schedule because you're living apart. You need to know where the kids are going to be, who's going to pay the bills, who's going to live in the house, what's going to happen with those assets, and who's going to keep which car and that kind of thing. So that's what that document will do. And you can put in that document that if you don't reconcile, this will be an order of the court for an uncontested divorce, or you may put in the document that you have to refile and it goes away, or if you reconcile, what happens if you do that? Does it just go away or does it stay separate?
So you can get spousal support when you're separated then? Court ordered?
Yeah, it would be the separate maintenance order would be part of the court order.
Separate maintenance order.
Sounds like a win-win.
Right.
More notes for everyone.
But I will tell you the catch-22 on that. A lot of times when I file those petitions for separate maintenance, the other person will counterclaim for divorce. Kind of starts to
start the ball rolling.
Once you start it down the hill, I warn my clients that may trigger something. They say, "Well, I'm just I was ready anyway, so I'm going to go ahead and do this." Or they'll get upset. It's so easy. It's
so emotional.
It's 2 or 3 lines on a paper that changes it from separate maintenance to a divorce.
A divorce, right?
Be ready. Don't do that light. Don't take that lightly.
Wow. Hey guys, I know you learned a lot in this podcast. Well, make sure you tune in next week to hear the second half.